Hello and welcome to the Neuropod. My name is James Hollis and I'm joined by my neurodivergent colleague and friend,
James Kenyon, and we are here to discuss everything neurodivergent and the challenges that people face from neurodivergence, but also we're here to champion neuro-inclusion.
I'm delighted to be speaking to you today along with JK from the second destination on our Neuropod tour, and that is Manchester. Yes, we are still here in the fantastic city of Manchester in the north of England.
And it's stopped raining, which is
marvelous.
marvellous.
It's stopped raining, in fact, and today
it's just very cold.
It is cold, but the sun is shining, so fantastic as we close up our final episodes today, which will focus on autism and early years. So with that in mind, I'd like to kick off this final episode of early years and childhood with a focus on autism by asking James a bit about the final years in primary school. So maybe you'd like to take us a bit through your early memories when it comes to your final years at primary school, if you will.
It was interesting. We went on our own odyssey as a family, interestingly enough. I think I said in the last episode, we moved to Australia and New Zealand and then back to the UK. So by the time I finished primary school, I'm just going to count. I'd been to about 6 or 7 primary schools by the time that I left primary school, which was in the year of 1991.
So quite discombobulating, right?
Yes. And it was an interesting experience. But by the time I left primary school, I was in a class and we ended up living in Birmingham. And I was in a class of the people that had been together since what in England we would call reception class. So from about 4.5, 5 years old. And they were all very emotional and crying and everything like that. And of course, I'd only come into the class about, I don't know, how many, 8 to 6 months previously. I didn't understand the sort of like the levels of emotion, and I was just a bit confused. What I'm trying to say, I think, is that by the time I'd finished primary school, I was a bit discombobulated. I had got used to the idea of moving and then remaking a set of friends and what have you. And I'd also got used to the idea that I was slightly, even when I had re-established myself, that I was a little bit unusual child.
Unusual in what way?
Well, even then I was sort of starting to get interested in history, particularly of the war. I became a little bit obsessed by that, which we can discuss at some point. I was reading quite a lot. I was doing a lot of creative writing by that point at school, and I was like living in a little bit in my own bubble and what have you. There were some friends that I had who I used to, not very many, but there were 1 or 2 that I sort of used to engage in this sort of flights of fancy. And I don't know, what about your last years at primary school, James? What memories do they hold for you particularly?
Let's put it this way. I had gone from being a sort of leader right at the beginning to then losing quite a few friends because of my interests were so particular.
Were you losing friends?
Well, yes, because it got to a point where as you grow older and sort of between those ages of 5 and say 12 years old, you start focusing on your interests a bit more in depth, I would say. And then as a result of that, of other of your peers would just say, oh, well, that's we're not really into discussing history. Whereas earlier on, it was more like war games in the playground. And you're doing that less and less as the older you get. But then what happened is that towards the end of my primary school years, I remember once getting a dressing down from a teacher, which I thought was very unreasonable because of the way I was behaving in a certain way, which maybe came across as slightly eccentric. But it was not in a way which I thought was actually offensive to anyone. But she gave me a dressing down saying, you are 12 years old. You've got to start behaving properly and behaving like someone who's ready to go on to, which would be rather high school for our overseas listeners. And as a result of that, I felt actually quite betrayed by my teacher.
Did you actually understand at the time or subsequently what she was talking about?
I did, because she set it out to me in detail. But because I felt I wasn't offending anybody else, it seemed like I was offending her. I felt there was a real sense of hurt on my side. I took the view that I've got problems making friends in general, keeping friends here at school. But on the other side, the teachers also don't accept me. So there's only one other option for me, and I'm only going to be here for another year, is that I got involved with the loudest and the most troublesome pupils in the school.
You think in retrospect that was a form of almost masking your real interests or real personality?
I had to adopt a mask when I joined this troublesome group of pupils at primary school. But I took the view that this was a sort of reaction against what I saw as a perceived injustice on my part, because I had been
So
someone...
you felt the injustice very keenly then?
I did feel it very keenly because I felt I was being someone who is neurodivergent in the autistic sense. I was very into rules, so I always obeyed all of the rules at school. But I thought, well, I'm now being persecuted in my eyes. I'm being persecuted even despite the fact that I'm abiding by all of the school rules. So I thought to myself, right, we're going to change it now in the final year. I'm only going to be here for a year. Let's get involved with the troublesome trucks.
Troublesome trucks, yes.
If I can take that.
Yes.
To use that analogy, which we used in a previous episode. And so I got involved with them. I had to, first of all, earn their trust that I could keep secrets from the teachers. A bit like an initiation, but it wasn't a sort of an initiation in the sort of, no, nothing like that. It was more of a initiation in the sense of, can I keep a secret from teachers, which I was happy to do. And then after that, I got accepted into the tribe, so to speak. And that was, I actually have quite fond memories of that time, even though we got into a lot of trouble. We got into a lot of trouble as a group. So I felt like I wasn't getting in exactly, and I didn't feel I was getting into trouble as a single individual. I wasn't doing so much instigation. I was just playing along. I was, because I wasn't used to breaking school rules or rebelling against the system. So I had to watch how it was done and just go along with it. And I thought to myself, well, this is quite fun, actually. But I just want to emphasize is I took that view at the end of my primary school years because I felt like I'd done all that was possible to be accepted, at least by the teachers. And I felt that they had rejected. So I thought to myself, well, that was it. This was a sort of reaction, and it was a sort of, I guess you could even say, a revenge on my part. And that was the final straw for me, because that wasn't just one incident where that teacher gave me a significant dressing down. It was a culmination of a number of incidents, and that was sort of the final straw.
I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about almost feeling persecuted by the teacher, which is quite a strong word.
It was, and I still remember to this day that conversation she had with me. And it was not just hurtful. I felt actually quite humiliated in a way.
Really?
It wasn't in front of the class, but it was in front of another school pupil who she wanted to, for whatever reason, pay witness to the dressing down that she gave me. Yeah, to what she said. What was that like for you in those final years? Did something change in you, like me, in a drastic sense?
No, I tried to keep the school rules as much as I could. Not to say that I didn't get in trouble from time to time. I remember one or two occasions where I was accused of doing things which I don't think, I know almost certainly that I didn't do, and got into a bit of severe trouble for that. And I do remember feeling that sense of injustice keenly, but I was much more compliant, really. I suppose in retrospect, I was a bit of not a goody two-shoes exactly, but I suppose in some ways...
So no apple for the teacher?
No, just thinking about it, in some ways, that was a form of masking, really, because I wanted to be as compliant as possible, because that was the way almost that I saw it fitting in, really. Which is ironic, really, given what you've just said. It wasn't necessarily a way that I felt a way of fitting in with my peers, but it was a way of fitting in with the teachers, ironically. And I felt more of a pull towards what they thought than maybe what my contemporaries might have thought.
It must have been the natural progression from a time when you and I both found it much easier to interact with adults than we did of individuals of our own.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that now, actually, whether that was as you say, a manifestation of that. And it's probably true. I mean, not that I didn't have friends of my own age. I was never in a group, so to speak, or at least if I was in a group, it was sort of more of a group of mutual outsiders. I sort of, for want of a better phrase, ploughed a little bit my own furrow. And in retrospect, I did miss very much almost the security of primary school when we will talk about secondary school in another episode, compared to almost the bear pit of secondary school. But I think that's also linked to a pathological loathing of change, which may not be a surprise for people to hear when they hear that I've moved around quite a lot now. And the moving around was good in lots of ways and was interesting. But as I say, it had that as a byproduct. I don't think that's really answered the question, but anyway.
No, I think that's a good additional detail that you've provided there. When it comes to that group of outsiders, tell us a bit about how many of you were there.
Not that many, if I'm being honest. So, for example, new kids that came into the class along myself. So they also had to sort of fit in. So I would literally feel more in common with them and gravitate towards them. And that was fine because I made friends that way and that sort of thing. So in terms of rules and that sort of thing, which I think you were talking about flouting because you felt humiliated, and I think I didn't have that experience. I felt more or less that I should keep the rules, and partly that was because, as I say, I wanted to be compliant and fit in with what I was expected of me. But also, I think it was an extension really of, because I'd been quite a naughty child previously, I almost went to the opposite extreme and became more compliant as I got older by the end of primary school.
So from what you're saying, I think we adopted opposite approaches. You became more compliant, I became more troublesome.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it?
Trying to find different techniques of coping.
Yeah.
And then being pushed to an extreme, which is the opposite of how you are behaving, and just as a way of seeing if that approach would work.
And also, I was conscious about the fact I didn't like the tension that was created by people breaking the rules. So when other people were in class who had, whatever reason, committed an infraction, and the whole class was collectively punished, usually by, I don't know, having to stay in a break or whatever it was, I didn't get angry with the person necessarily. I didn't express myself that way, but I didn't understand why that they were behaving in that way. That was almost, ironically, a lack of empathy with rule breakers.
Well, tell us a bit about the run-up to exams at the end of primary school. So those did you say it's a common entrance exam?
No. We didn't have any of those public school antics.
Yes, okay. Right. Well,
No. I went to a state primary school in Birmingham. We didn't have things like common entrance exams.
So common entrance exams for our overseas listeners are those exams that you can take to go for admittance into high school. Sometimes you take them. In my case, private school, yes. Sometimes you take them in my case, and sometimes you don't in the case of JK. The JK, could you tell us a bit about, when it came to your neurodivergence, was there any discussion about what particular school that you would have needed to gain entry to be able to support you the best?
No, and this is the other interesting thing, because the way that they did it in Birmingham with as I say, it was what Americans and Australians would call a public school, as in a genuinely public school, or state school as we would call it. We basically just picked from 2 or 3 schools and gave it in an order of preference. I decided to go to a secondary school where a lot of other people from my school were going. And in retrospect, I'm not entirely sure that was the right idea, particularly given what I've just said. I did go along with the crowd on that. So the issue was, interestingly enough, that the manifestations of the ADHD had slightly calmed down, although I still had difficulties in concentrating, particularly on topics that I wasn't terribly interested in. But then I would get a hyper-focus on particular topics that I was interested in, like the war, for example. So the behavioural issues had sort of calmed down, as I say, but underlying the end of primary school, it was a bit more of just doing what my contemporaries and the other kids were doing, really.
Did you have any problem getting into that first choice?
No. Which might or might not tell you something about the school. But I didn't have any problems with that. And it wasn't as competitive. The interesting thing about Birmingham is they've got one of the few grammar school systems left in the UK or left in England. And of course, to go to grammar school, you have to take an exam called the 11 plus. And I was actually being tutored for that before there were various reasons why I didn't take the exam. And I found the verbal and numerical reasoning. I didn't find the verbal reasoning too bad, but there was lots of the numerical reasoning, which I found totally incomprehensible.
Back to the dreaded maths words.
Exactly. It was something I didn't. So, I think that was a large part of the reason why I didn't sit the exam. So, I was entered for the 11 plus, interestingly enough, but I never got there. That doesn't particularly bother me, to be quite honest.
No, but you felt at the time your parents and yourself felt it was the right school for you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think there were any better ones, if I'm being honest, in the area. So it was basically going to where a lot of the other kids were going as well.
Right. So would I be able to propose that it would give you a bit more predictability because familiar faces would have been more helpful to you?
There was that element of predictability. And that's a good point, actually. And what about yourself? Because you obviously had a more competitive time, particularly talking about your common entrance exam and choosing schools and stuff like that. was that more of an issue then in terms of what school you were going to go to?
It was, and I had real difficulties to begin with when it came to what school was going to be chosen for me. I remember my parents went to go and see the headmaster, and they said, we want James to be considered for the following schools, which were some of the top schools. And he turned around to them and said, you overestimate James's ability, which was not very something a parent wants to hear.
Not particularly.
I think, again, coming back to it, there's a lot to do with myself and learning. It had to do with the methods which were used to teach me. And he sort of turned around to my mother and sort of said to her, well, actually, I don't think there will be any good school that he can get into, which my mother was very hurt by, because she thought that she had done her very best to support me, and so had my father, and she felt like the school was sort of writing me off at the age of 10, 11, which is a crazy thing to do, because you're just starting off in your life. You're not even half baked, so to speak.
No.
And so I remember
maybe it's a system that was half baked.
She was sort of like even choking back the tears when she was speaking to a friend of hers, and they gave her some support, some moral support, and then they suggested to her the following, that they go and have some specialist assessments done to work out how intelligent or not I actually am based on different teaching methods. So I remember going to this institute, and they did these tests on me, so verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, but in different ways. So I approached the problems in different ways, so different methods, and they actually
different methods to get to the same conclusion.
Exactly. Okay. And they actually turned around. They said, actually, James is perfectly capable.
Yes,
it's just the way he's being taught,
which
doesn't seem to gel with the way his mind works.
But then I suppose that's an interesting thing, because then that gave your mum and dad more of a steer as to the sort of school that you should go to.
Yeah, well, it gave them a real confidence boost, and it gave me a confidence boost, because actually it sort of said that James could actually achieve and get into a great school. And so they gave us a selection for which we should target, all of which were boarding schools, and we picked one to focus on. Then I went for the common entrance exam, and I passed, and I got in. I got some additional tutoring in the run up to that, especially in the area of dreaded mathematics, of course.
And everything. How do you feel that your autism, your neurodivergence affected you in terms of the school, the learning styles, that sort of thing? How did that positively and negatively affect you?
Well, from a negative perspective, it was coming back to it. It was just the way I was being taught. I was not being taught in a way which
directly connected with the way that your mind works, I suppose,
and the way I see the world. And
yes.
So that's one of the challenges we face in this, even today, is that schools are a case of one size should fit all, but that's most of the time not the case. And hopefully we'll be able to touch on this and investigate this area in greater detail in a later episode. But if I had been taught in a different way, using a variety of teaching methods, I think my learning could have improved to such an extent, then who knows, I could have been considered for some of the best schools in the country, potentially.
But you have that situation whereby obviously you have, I don't know how many children you had in the average class at your primary school. So obviously the teachers have to have
one size fits all approach.
They suppose they have to just by dint of the numbers involved, unless you sort of like got, I don't know, less than 10 in the class, in which case you can give them a lot more individual attention. So
exactly,
yeah.
And I remember,
so you suffered basically because of that.
I did, and my school grades also suffered as a result. And I remember it sort of, as they say, the definition of madness is doing the same thing again and again and hoping for a different outcome. And casting my mind back, when it came to mathematics, for example, I was being taught maths the same way again and again and again, and my grades carried on being poor and poor and poor. And you would have thought after a while the teacher would have said, right, maybe we should do something different here. But they didn't seem, the teacher at the time didn't really flag this to my parents and say, right, we really need to do something here, because these grades are he's just not meeting the minimum standard. And then I remember my parents got me a maths tutor outside of school, and my maths improved substantially because she tried different methods on me of sort of teaching me mathematics, so that when I did take that common entrance mathematics exam, I went over the minimum.
Interesting, because I think I'm going to be very blunt here and say that although you faced difficulties, you were given a degree of support externally from your schools, and that's not a privilege that a lot of kids have. And you did feel that that made the difference.
Exactly. And I'll always be grateful for my parents for giving me that additional support in the form of a maths tutor during those early formative years in primary school, something which that you weren't able to benefit from.
Well, I don't necessarily think that. I don't think that things were as desperate because I didn't need a particular level of maths to go to secondary school. What they did is they streamed people. So they streamed you according to your ability in secondary school. So you were either in the top set for maths or you're in the bottom set, or there was on 2 or 3 sets in the middle. And I wasn't in the bottom set, but I was not in the top set either. So as I say, that's more talking about secondary school, but there was in some ways less pressure. And I wonder whether you felt that the pressure exacerbated things.
The pressure was on, but looking back, the pressure was necessary, because if there hadn't been pressure in that final year, then I don't think I could have got into the good school that I got into in the end. And I think that was just really important to have that pressure. So in that last year, it was a dash to the finish line, quite last minute, trying to get me up to the minimum level of maths that I needed to then gain entry to the good school that I gained entry to. It also helped that for any shortcomings I may have had in mathematics, that at the same time I made up for it in other areas. So we were trying to be as strategic with this as possible. My history common entrance was very good. My languages were very good. So it sort of made up for any shortcoming I may have had in maths. But as I said, my maths got me to the mark I needed to gain entry to the school that I gained entry to.
You said in the previous episode that some people intimated that you might have had a form of schizophrenia, which is, as I say, I think we discussed at the time, was a pretty extreme sort of thing to say and have said over a child. Did you have an awareness at that point as that had been said, or did you only find out about that subsequently?
I did know that those sort of conversations were being had, and I guess that's why I took the decision to join the troublesome trucks. We must call them troublesome trucks.
Yeah,
I love that.
The troublesome trucks, yeah, just causing problems,
causing problems for the teachers. Because the reason I did that was, I guess there was something in me which sort of wanted to be normal and wanted to be accepted, quote unquote.
And you wanting to fit in, and the way of fitting into, or did you want to fit in with a larger group?
Fit in with a larger group and fit in with those who were regarded as, interesting enough, normal, because they were being troublesome, which was sort of normalized at primary school. It's like, oh, well, that's what young boys do, is that they are troublesome by nature. I always remember when we did our common entrance exam, I remember going around to that group, new old friends that I'd made, new old in the sense of I'd known them before, but they were new in the sense that I had gained entry to the group and had been accepted by them. And I remember going around to them as we went in for each common entrance exam, and from the Ridley Scott film Gladiator, actually we fist bumped and went strength and honor.
It's an interesting one because did you find deep down that you're actually enjoying doing that? Was there an enjoyment from it? Or
I did. Okay. I think it wasn't a case of...
I mean, not just the fist bumping and Russell Crowe quoting.
Of course
not. Being a troublesome truck.
Being a troublesome truck. There was something fun because then we went on a final, just to say, final school trip. And I was sitting at the back of the bus that I mentioned. I think I mentioned in a previous episode with the troublesome trucks. Well, we were troublesome. And I found it hilarious.
Yes.
Yeah, I take it you were not part of any troublesome group
no,
of
not really.
Kids
no.
Yourself.
I think no. I was very no. I was very
still a rule abider and a rule taker.
Yes, I think the only times that I broke the rules was probably by accident, to be quite honest, and was just getting a bit overexcited about things and being a bit noisy. That was my real problem. I remember actually that I used to get sent out final year in primary school. The teacher, he was an amateur actor and very, very, very good. And he would read us stories, usually Roald Dahl, things like that, like Dodie Smith and Enid Blyton and all that sort of stuff. And he used to do impressions and the voices and stuff like that. And I used to get sent out of the class for laughing too hard. So I would sort of like start giggling and couldn't stop. So then I would be sent out of the class. And I found that sort of a little bit embarrassing, but I couldn't help it, genuinely. It wasn't like I put it on or anything like that.
He probably thought you were putting it on because it seemed a bit over the top.
Yes, possibly. But yes, anyway, just going easy, go and calm down outside. I got on very well with the teacher, actually, seeing things from a slightly different perspective with the other kids as well.
Just finally, how did you feel about those new gain entry to your school of preference for high school, secondary school? How did you feel? What was the sort of feelings that were going on within you?
So it was going from being, obviously, primary school, you're in the last year 6, whatever it is, you go to being a very small fish in a very big pond again. You don't realise this at the time, but everyone's very short and everyone's very young, and you just sort of like into this big wide world of aggressive teenage boys. My secondary school was we would call a state school, public school, but it was an all-boys school as well. So yes, it was an interesting experience, and we can maybe come on to that in future episodes.
So I think that has been a really great way to start our analysis of early years in this regard. We will leave our listeners on complete tenterhooks as they hold their breath and wait for us to reveal the next stop on our Neuropod tour.
Yeah.
We will be focusing on autism and ADHD in teenage years with a focus on secondary school, the challenges that were associated with that time, both for JK and myself. If for all of you who would be interested in joining us, please do subscribe online at the Neuropod, all one word, available on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, along with various other social media platforms. But for now, from me and JK from Manchester, that is goodbye.
Goodbye.